Morning. We are learning chapter 6. So, as we mentioned, chapter 5 is really a parenthetical that begins in the end of chapter 4, as we went through last week. So, in a certain sense, this parak picks up with the parentheses in mid-chapter 4 left off. In chapter 4, we were discussing the concept of the interface between Havaya and Elohim, two different names of Hashem, which appear to represent two different aspects of godliness, which we will talk about. And we said that God filters his infinity down to us via the screen of Elohim. And we align this with the pasuk that says, Ki shemesh u'mogen havaya Elohim, like a sun and its screen is Havaya and Elohim, that if the screen was lifted off the sun, it would be overwhelming, it would be too fiery. And therefore, although we may complain that it's not fiery enough, or it's not hot enough, or it's not sunny enough, when we have that kind of screen, it allows us to absorb the Havaya or the sun in the metaphor or in the analogy for our capacity. So as we are sort of blending through in chapter 5 in the parentheses, we talked about the idea that Hashem had to create the world with Gevura. And we asked the question, well, how can you create something with Gevura? Gevura is the restraint of expression. It's not a mechanism of creation. So how, in fact, is it possible that something can be created with Gevura? It would seem that Gevura is about modifying a creation, not the source of creation. So we went on to describe in the chapter 5 in that parenthetical that Chesed and Gevura are not to be seen as two parallel lines.
In progress.
They're actually to be seen, I don't know what that was, they're actually to be seen as a singular entity of absolute alignment. So it's not that there's a chesed quality and there's a gevura quality, and you mix them together with a little chesed and a little gevura, and you get the consequence. Part of the mission of Shaar Hayichud Ba'amunah is to underscore that the chesed and the gevura are all the same. And that's why gevura could be a form of creation, not just a form of restraint of expression, which we'll develop here. Now, as a general introductory concept, we find that the practice of cooperation is truly a sign of holiness. In Torah, the model of unholiness is the desert. What is the difference between the desert and the farm? In that in the desert, every grain of sand is independent. They have no cooperation. That's why when you pick up the sand, every grain is individualized. In contrast to soil, where it clumps together. What is the simple process of how food is grown? That the soil, which contains nutrients, contributes its nutrients to the seed. The seed thus becomes a plant. The plant thus produces fruit. The fruit is fed to the animal. The animal is fed to the person. The person has now the energy to serve Hashem, to which Hashem reinstills the nutrients into the soil, and this healthy cycle continues forever. In contrast to the desert, to Klippa, where nobody is willing to cooperate with anybody else. Now, of course, it is true that Hewlett and Packard come together and work in partnership. So is that innately Kedusha? Well, it may be. I mean, Kedusha can exist in that sense. Or it can sometimes be, I'm one, the other person is one. I will profit by my efforts. He will profit by his efforts. And if we combine efforts, we'll both profit even more. That should not be confused for holiness and union and cooperation. It's really just mutual benefit. That is, in that sense of partnership, it's not unity. The two don't become one. The two actually remain separate entities, yet they're each in need of each other, and therefore they cooperate. So when I go to the grocery store and I give them money and they give me food, that's not a partnership. That's not unity. They have a need for money. I have a need for food. They provide what I don't have. I provide what they don't have, and everybody goes on their way. Now, this becomes most profoundly evident in the ultimate combination of Yaakov and Asov. So Yaakov and Asov are born of the same act of conception. They're absolute twins, born in the most unified of manner, literally from the same birth, and yet they're so different. So we ask, how does that work out? But we see that Yaakov is not really that different than Asov, as evidenced by the fact that he taps into and expresses his innate Asov. That is, when Yaakov needs to sort of mature and grow, he takes on Asov qualities. He dresses like Asov. He even says, Ani b'chorcha Asov, I am your firstborn Asov. So what we see is the difference between Yaakov and Asov is that Yaakov is willing to embrace his Asov, not the negative characteristic of Asov, but to unify Yaakov and Asov and thus produce this characteristic that transforms him into Yisrael. In contrast to Asov, who says, I'm Asov. He doesn't leave the land. He doesn't go out of his physical boundaries. He doesn't go out of his characteristic boundaries. He remains absolutely focused and single-laned of his own identity. He is Asov, never to allow his potential Yaakov quality to express itself. So a surefire sign of holiness is to see that we are not rigidly Yaakov or Asov, Chesed or Gevura. This becomes perhaps most profoundly illustrated in our pledge of Nasav and Nishma. So very quickly, probably everyone remembers that before Hashem gave us the Torah, he went to the nations of the world and he said, will you accept the Torah? So each nation said, well, what does it say in the Torah? And Hashem told them something that he knew they wouldn't like. So they said, no, we don't want it. So Hashem came to the Jewish people and we said, Nasa, we'll do it, V'nishma, then we'll understand. That's the basic story everybody is familiar with. We further double down on this. We say, well, hold on. Since the mitzvahs that Hashem is offering to the nations of the world are all the mishpatim, so why doesn't Hashem explain to them why they should want to accept this mitzvah? Meaning, we argue that these mitzvahs are reasonable and create a better society. And you don't have to be spiritual in order to appreciate them. So why doesn't Hashem, if he's genuinely serious, and this isn't just some sort of show that he's offering it to them, they said no, he says, okay, bye. So Hashem could convince them. So we explain, because if Hashem convinces them, then they're not accepting Hashem. Then they're only accepting that it's a rational idea. And then they're serving themselves, they're not serving Hashem. This is a concept we're all familiar with. But this then raises the question. So why is it that when the Jewish people said, Hashem says to the Jewish people, will you accept my commandments? We said, we'll do them and we'll understand. Why do we have to say Nishma? Why don't we just say Nasa? We'll do them. Meaning, why are we so insistent that the virtue is that they said Nasa before Nishma? Why even say Nishma at all? Just say Nasa, we'll do it. Now, of course, we would have to learn how to do it. So that's not what Nishma means. I mean, if Hashem tells me to put up a mezuzah, I have to learn what a mezuzah is. So Nishma must mean something more than just the instructional side of the mitzvahs. So Chassidus, we explain that Nishma means we understand why this mitzvah is important to Hashem, how it changes the world, what its essence is. But this seems to raise the question. So why are we even saying that? Why do we have to know? Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. So here, based on what we're going to learn now, we understand this idea that rather than seeing Nasa and Nishma as two different lanes, and then it becomes a question about whether my commitment to obedience is linked to my understanding, or my understanding is the product of doing it. We now understand that the difference between the Gentiles' perspective and the Jewish perspective is not about which one comes first, but about if these are two separate mechanisms of being close with Hashem. So we tend to think that there are Nasa people and there are Nishma people, and that we want to give primacy to the Nasa before the Nishma. And here Chassidus is going to explain to us that Nasa and Nishma are all one and the same. Chesed and Gevura are the same. Material and spiritual are the same. They are all Ein Oid Mavada. There's nothing else besides Hashem. So at the end of the chapter, this is the point we're going to finally come to understand. Not that there's nothing important besides Hashem, but it is all Hashem. The Chesed is Hashem, the Gevura is Hashem, the Nasa is Hashem, the Nishma is Hashem. Instead of our tendency, which is to see things in individuated parts. This is why the nations had no capacity to declare Nasa v'Nishma, because they are rooted in their humanity. And in the characteristic of humanity, there's going to be separation. The definition of humanity is there's a difference between yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So in humanity, there's a big difference. It's in the level of godliness, at this intense level of godliness, a level that's outside of the creative characteristic of godliness, that Chesed and Gevura are all one and the same, and therefore Gevura can create like Chesed creates. So here we go, Perek Vav, V'hine. So again, like we always point out, whenever they start with a Vav, that means there's a continuation. Like we said, this is the ongoing about the quality that Tzimtzum and Giloy are all the same, because things don't have significance before Hashem, who is not definable as a thing. So we say, V'hine Shem Elikim, when we see the name Elikim, which is the first introduction we have to Hashem. Torah opens Bereshis Bara Elikim. And remember, we don't really get the level of Havaya, the Yud Kei Vav Kei level. We don't get it directly. We just get it in what we call a remez. It's alluded to in Vayhi Erev, Yom HaShishi, Vayhi Erev, Vayichulu Hashemayim, Yom HaShishi, Vayichulu Hashemayim, those four words, Yom HaShishi, Vayichulu Hashemayim, the first letter of each of those words is Yud, then Hey, then Vav, then Hey. That's the first time we get to meet the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, if we think about this in our own lives, or we use the analogy that Torah is like a child that's being raised. So when a child thinks of their parents, so as a small child, you ask the child, what is your parent? You say, my parent is the one who provides for me. My parent created me. They protect me. They provide for me. They nurture me. They guide me. They instruct me. They teach me. So this is a very Elohim level of the parent. The parent is seen as they are defined by the child. This is how we are by Hashem. Our first introduction to Hashem is that Hashem is the creator. So that the premise is I exist, and I acknowledge that God is the source of my existence. That's the quality of Elohim. Then, as we hopefully mature, like a child matures, and they can make their own peanut butter and jelly and cross the street by themselves, so they start to realize that they need their parent, not because they need something from their parent, because they can take care of themselves. They're already an adult and they can feed themselves and care for themselves. So why do they need their parent? Because they need that essential idea that we see something greater than ourselves. An example. To follow this concept, we know that the Aseres HaDibros, the 10 Commandments, are given on two separate tablets. So we ask the question, what is the division? What is the dividing point? So the simple mathematic is 5 and 5. We assume that there's some greater message here than just the division of the commandments. So there's many explanations. One explanation is that the first 5 commandments are all about what we look above us. I am Hashem, don't have other gods, don't take my name in vain, Shabbos, which we'll get to, and parents. When a person respects their parents, and we don't mean that they patronize them and put them in the nice nursing home, but they truly have reverence for them, then it reminds the person that they should look at where they come from. If you think about our secular society, one of the flaws of our secular society is that we have this presumption that every generation is smarter than the previous generation. And therefore, anything that's old is innately flawed. Now, who always rails against this? Which is old people, because they say, no, we know better than you. And we're all about the children outpacing the parents, and we're all about capturing that youth. But we do not believe that every generation innately, because it's new, therefore it is innately wiser or smarter. We see that there is a value, and we value this is history. That's why we begin our davening. Our God and God of our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and so. And the second set of the Ten Commandments are all about things that are beneath us, that we shouldn't lower ourselves to murder and adultery and robbery and lying, etc. So the first is about what's above us, to look above us. And the second is to look about what is, quote, below us. Well, this is how the creation story goes. The first introduction we have to Hashem is like a child. Who is Hashem? He's the one who created me. The presumption is I'm here. And therefore, if I'm here, there's got to be a watchmaker maker. So that is Hashem. That's Elohim. When do we first get a glimpse that Hashem is something more than just our creator? Like the child can learn that their parent is something more than the one who provides them with what they need. So this is a very subtle hint, because if it's overwhelmingly obvious, we don't know how to deal with it, because it presumes that I am not the center of the universe. Oh, I know that. But we don't know that, because we validate everything by, well, that makes sense to me. Oh, I understand that. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah, that. So then again, the validation is that I like it. What is the pushback? The ultimate pushback to that is Shabbos, because on Shabbos we're saying that creation is not the product, or it is not the primary focus of all of existence. It is our opportunity. Shabbos laHashem Elokecha. Now, we're all about chalent, and we're all about taking a Shabbos nap. But as we know, Shabbos is not, on Shabbos, now I get to indulge myself. The 6 days of the week after work. And on Shabbos, I eat and sleep and wear fancy clothes because I like it. Because what happens one day when I don't like it? I still have to do it. So we know Shabbos is laHashem Elokecha. Shabbos is about Hashem. Again, I'm all for chalent. But Shabbos is not about what I get. Shabbos is about my opportunity to have insight into the infinity of Hashem. And again, that has to be brought to us in a very delicate sense, so it doesn't overwhelm us. And again, maybe you even know people like this. They have Shabbos and they say, well, how do you just sit around all day and not do, well, what if I get a phone call? Well, right? It's very hard to not be engaged in the creation and instead to just be absorbed in that infinity. It's very disruptive. We think we like it, but it could be very hard. Okay. Hine Shem Elokim, who Shem midas hagvura v'atzimtzum. The name Elokim is a name. It's a mechanism, or it's a portal of entry. It's an opportunity to be connected. Just like a person has a name. So for other people, I don't need a name for myself. I need a name, like I need a phone number so somebody else can reach out to me. Similarly, Hashem has these different names as a method for us to have some connective relationship with him. So when we are introduced to Hashem, like in the beginning, the very first time, with Elohim, Bereshis bara Elohim, that our opportunity to be connected with Hashem comes through Elohim, that is Hashem expressing himself in Gevura and Tzimtzum. Now, as we've talked about, Gevura means restraint. Like we say in Pirkei Avos, it's harder to restrain myself than it is to conquer a city. So it is about the restraint. Now, we tend to associate Gevura with being harsh, but that's a mistake. I mean, it could be that's an abuse of gevura, is to just be mean and just to be unforthcoming. But gevura means that I restrain myself so that the other person, the one with whom I am in a connected relationship, can have an understanding. I mean, you think about this in any form of teaching, whether you're in a classroom teaching or you're just showing somebody how to operate some piece of machinery. If you don't attenuate, if you don't direct your lesson to the capacity of the student, that is gevura, that's a gevura, then I'm not really thinking about the student. So I want to teach calculus, but this person needs to learn simple math. So if I'm going to teach him what I want to teach him, I'm not thinking about him. So again, we have gevura gets, and Tzimtzum also gets a bit of a bum rap. It's like it's mean. It's like not being nice. It's withholding. Instead of understanding that it is a method through which we can communicate because we are desirous of being connected with the recipient. So when Hashem gevuras us and tzimtzums us, we might get frustrated. The alternative is Hashem overwhelms us. So tzimtzum is the product of concern with the recipient. You know, if you've ever had anybody buy you the gift of what they want you to have versus what you want to have, they have not employed the gevura. I really want you to have this, but I don't like it. But everybody else loves it, but I don't like it. So they're not listening to you. So they're buying you something and you're allergic to it. Okay. Well, and for this reason, and then again, another opportunity, who gam came bigamatria hateva. Okay. So here the Alter Rebbe introduces an idea to us that we have come across, and you'll come across it many times. Chassidus often makes this point. The name of Hashem, Elohim, is the same numerical value as the phrase ha-teva. Ha-teva means the state of nature. Now, where this word teva comes to mean nature, we'll talk about. But first, we have to do the math. And this is a good trick question. You try this out on everybody. How could Elohim be the gematria of ha-teva? Because the kuf alone in Elohim is 100. And ha-teva is only 5 and 9 and 2 and 70. So how can they be the same? That's a joke, because it's not Elohim, of course. We just put the kuf in there because we don't want to say Hashem's name. But you try that out on your friends, and they'll love you for it. Okay, because it's not Elohim, of course. The kuf is just what we put in there. Now, what is the word ha-teva? Yes, you look up the word ha-teva and translate, and it translates it as, quote, nature. Fine, good. Where does this word come from? So here, a little background that's important. And again, feel free to pull out the shepherd's crook and rein me in, but we did say that this time around, we wanted to go a little more slowly and more detailed. So I know I have a tendency to sometimes go off on a tangent. We know, as we've talked about, and this is not just a general lesson, but it's directly relevant to what we've been talking about here in Hayichud, which is the power of the letters. Remember, we said Bereshis in the beginning of creation. It's not the beginning because, of course, Hashem predates creation, although there's no idea of time. It's very important as well. It's like a child who thinks that life began with me. Life began with my existence. Nothing existed before I existed. So Hashem predates creation. Then Hashem creates, and he creates Elohim. That is, it is the characteristic of Gevura. So we are in a Gevura mindset, which means now, as we have said, that I am attuned to my audience. When we say that I am creating, I have to create in concert and in focus of my recipient, the person who is receiving from me. Otherwise, I'm doing what I want. You know, if you hire a musician, you tell them what music to play. They don't tell you what music to play. So Hashem says, I am willing and desirous and passionate about what is meaningful to you, not what's meaningful to me. And what does Hashem create? And as we explained, and it's repeated in many contexts, and you'll see it time and again in Hasidus, S doesn't have an English translation, but it is a reference to Aleph through Tuf, the first Hebrew letter to the last Hebrew letter. That means that the first step that Hashem takes in the creation process that will resonate with the recipients of creation is via the process of the letters. There has to be the letters. They become the little pellets of energy, each one distinctive, that is now brought into the world. If Hashem would not create with letters, I mean, Hashem would do whatever he wants, but if Hashem would not create with letters, we would have no capacity to blend together and turn nature into art. Think about what we do with letters. We take individual letters, we turn them into words, sentences, paragraphs, chapters, books. We communicate the most delicate, intense, intellectual ideas, emotional ideas, experiential, via the power of letters. Letters are tools that allow us to blend them together. That is the distinctive characteristic of language. When we categorize the world, we talk about the inanimate domain, mineral, rocks, and dirt. We talk about tzomeach, the blossoming, the vegetation. We talk about animals that are alive and walk around and we feel their pulse. And we talk about midaber, speakers, communicators, the human ability to formulate letters, which allows us to create relationship and interaction that is beyond just some physical animalistic level. And then to create societies. And then from there to develop intellectually and characteristically, and to express via whether it's poetry or it's science or it's ideas, that is the product of taking these 22 pellets of energy and seeing how they are not rigid. I mean, if I have rocks, I can pile all the rocks together, but they're all individual rocks. But when I have a word, when I have Bereshis, I don't see it as 5 independent letters, or 6, however many letters it is. I see it as one word. It ceases to be just individual parts that are piled up together, like you can pile up rocks or wood or whatever it may be. Letters allow us to have genuine unification, the cooperation, like we talked about before with the soil in contrast to the sands of the desert. We have it, it's coming up, not this week, but next week, we're finally going to catch up to Eretz Yisrael in the Torah reading by having a double parsha. So there is a whole series of parshas in Torah that are eligible for doubling. We've bypassed a bunch of them already. So there must be some pecking order at some, I'm not on that committee that decides, but for some reason, depending on how the year works out. So there are some parshas that are almost always doubled. So why don't we call them one parsha? And once in a while, we'll have a half parsha. What is the concept of the double parsha? So as the Rebbe often explains with the double parsha, it's more than just 2. Meaning, if you have one rock, you have 2 rocks, you got 2 rocks. If you got one parsha, you got a second parsha. You make it a double parsha, it becomes one parsha. It becomes one. I mean, it's the most intense illustration of this is, therefore a man shall leave his mother and father and cleave unto his wife and become one. Meaning, it's not that you have 2 parshas, that you're reading 2 parshas that Shabbos. It's not this Shabbos, it's next Shabbos. You're reading one parsha that is 2 parshas combined. How does that happen? Because while each parsha retains its own identity, there is a new identity in the fact that it becomes one with the second parsha. So we'll have Matos and Masai. So there's a Matos parsha, there's a Masai parsha, and there's a Matos Masai parsha, which is not the same as 1 rock, 2 rocks. 2 rocks are 2 separate rocks. This is the power that letters and language allow us to utilize, Torah language. Now, within this, we find it manifest in a few different ways beyond the obvious, which is we string together words and letters and so on. Like I said, we don't see it as 6 letters, we see it as 1 word. We also consequently have the opportunity to see an interrelationship between ideas that may on the surface not seem that related, meaning when you have a word and then you have a form of the word, so we recognize that there's an interaction between them. That's why, as a rule of thumb, you cannot define a word by using the word. And if I say, what is a desk? I can't say a desk is a desk. It becomes circular. You can't define the word with the word. So a word can have multiple forms. I have desks, desk-like, whatever it is. But in Torah, we have words that appear on the surface to have no connection with each other. But the fact that they are comprised of the same letters, or a little more subtly, they have the same gematria, is not happenstance. Oh, look at that. What a coincidence that these two words are made up of the same letters, or they're made up of letters that their numerical value happens to be the same. Wow, look at that. It means that there's a greater connection between them. An analogy. If we had a way of charting all of human history, we would see how everybody is related. You know, they have even now these tests, and they'll tell you you're a 17th cousin to the 14th prime minister of Belgium or whatever it is. But we know that we all come from Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. But I'm more obviously related to my brother than I am to another Jew who I've never met, who's a stranger. And if I happen to know that I come from a certain tribe, so I come from Shevet Levi, so I'm a little more obviously related to anyone else who's a Levi, but not that much more obviously related, and so on and so forth. So too, within all letters, because every letter is essentially infinity through the stencil, and therefore it has this particular characteristic of infinity, so every word that has a base in it is related at some level to every other word that has a base. But it's not so obvious. It's hard to see it. Maybe if your person's at such a level of infinity, they can see how every base word is interconnected. When I start to get a little bit more obvious a correlation, such as two words that have the same letters, and a little less obvious, two words that have the same gematria, I can start to say, oh, wow, look at that. There's a greater relationship and connection. And since, of course, this is not happenstance, and it's not just a game, there is meaning and purpose behind all of it. So if we look deeper and deeper, we'll find more and more meaning, more and more connection. So when it comes to Hashem's name, this becomes something that's even more worthwhile for us to pursue. So here we go back to this statement that the Alter Rebbe quotes here. And again, you'll see it time and again in Chassidus, that Elohim, that characteristic of Hashem, is the same numerical value as the word HaTeva. Now, HaTeva, translation, the state of nature. The state of nature. So Elohim is Hashem expressing himself in nature. It's tzimtzum. We like nature. Now, when we say nature, we don't just mean the pristine mountains and forests. We mean all that is essentially predictable. The functioning of a car is nature. What it means, nature. It's not intuitive. It's not indigenous, but we expect it to happen. In a certain sense, nature is just a miracle we've gotten accustomed to. So whether it's technology like we've talked about or whatever it is, we just expect it to work. There's a logical progression. So when we say nature in this context, it's very different than when we say nature, perhaps in a secular context, in Grizzly Adams out living on berries that he forages in the woods. So it doesn't mean nature in that sense. In addition, what does the word teva mean? Yes, it means nature. Why does the word teva mean nature? So the Alter Rebbe doesn't mention it here in depth, but again, a little more background. The word teva, or the letters tes, vez, ayin, also is the word for toveya. Toveya with a tes, vez, ayin, there's another word with a tuf, but that's different. Tes, vez, ayin means to sink. A ship sunken in the sea. What does sunken have to do with nature? So again, just like if I'm standing on the ocean, all I see is the water. And I don't realize that there is a ship or whatever it is that has sunken below the sea. And the sunken ship is unchanged. It's just concealed. I don't see the ship, but it is absolutely subsumed within the waters. Similarly, the infinity of Hashem, which I don't see in the routine, predictable patterns of nature, is present within nature like the ship which has sunken under the waters. It, that is the infinity of Hashem, the sea, whatever it is completely submerged underneath the waters. Another example of this word, the word for a coin, a minted coin, is matbeya, same primary letters, tes, beis, ayin. What is the significance there? That again, a king mints a coin. We use the same word, matbeya, for established procedures such as davening or the lingo of certain documents. Law really dislikes creativity. Contracts are not poetry because poetry is ambiguous and we want certainty in law. So in davening and in certain practices, we prohibit any deviation. Next thing you know, they're passing their kids through the fire. We don't want any change. We want matbeya, that which has been fixed. So if a king fixes coins, right, we want the coins to be trustworthy. What is fiat currency that we have? That if I give you a green piece of paper, you give me a pencil. But you say, but I gave you something of significance. I gave you a functioning pencil. You gave me with a piece of green paper with a dead president on it. Well, that's what we said. Matbeya, we have fixed that I can walk out the store, and if you call the police and you say he took my pencil and he didn't give me, this note is good for all debts, public and private. It's been matbeya. It has been fixed that way. So again, this is the idea of the fixed characteristic that we have in nature. Toiveya, with that additional vav, is that the infinity of Hashem is sunken. So while we assume death and taxes, that there's nature and it's endless and it's always going to happen, as we talked about in the previous chapter, Hashem sprinkles in nisim, miracles, disruptions of nature, tzaddikim, disruptors of nature. Think about our society, secular society, doesn't trust anybody. We don't believe in tzaddikim. We don't even believe anybody's righteous. Mr. Rogers has got 7 Rolls Royces hidden away somewhere. We can't believe it. We don't accept that people are virtuous. He just acts that way. We're going to do an investigation and find out where he really once cut the tags off his mattress. We're going to find it because we don't believe it. Everybody is vulnerable to temptation. Nobody is virtuous and righteous. Why? Because if we only have teva, then that's the nature of it. But if we have toiveya, if we understand that the infinity of Hashem is sunken within it, so then the rigidity of unimaginable, unbreakable, absolutely repeats itself every time without change is broken. It's very disruptive. So that which is in part leads to the cynicism. It's very much the parsha. When Pinchas does this act of heroism, what do the people do? They go, oh, he's just bloodthirsty. I'm a sweetheart. He's a bully. Why? Because it's very disrupting to think that nature is not, tomorrow the sun's not going to rise in the east and set in the west. I don't like that. It puts demands on me. It means all the things that I worked for my whole life, my whole fantasy that I built up, that I have got absolute security, is blown out of the water. It puts demands on me. Remember how good it was back in Egypt, where they gave us fish and leeks for free with no demands on me, and so on. So all of this characteristic is coming together. And now we start to see why it's a little more disruptive. We want a little more, not us, we're perfect, but we want a little more gevura. We really like that sense of tzimtzum. Don't give me so much God. That's okay, Rabbi. You don't have to come to my house. I don't want to bother you. You don't have to come and teach me Torah. You don't have to come and put on the film with me. I don't want to bother you. Is it really that you don't want to bother me, or you don't want to be disrupted? We love our routines, not us. We're good. We love our routines because, but oh, my life, if we didn't love it, we wouldn't do it. It's very frightening. I hate to learn stuff. Who wants to learn new things? You learn new things, it puts new demands on you. I don't want to learn that ice cream is bad for me. Think about how long it took for this country to get smoking out of its psyche. Everybody smoked. They said it's bad for, nah, it's not. It's only bad. Nah, it's not, right? Because I don't want to stop doing it. Look out, seatbelts. Who could imagine people used to not wear seatbelts? But it takes time. But the good news is it works, right? Who doesn't wear a seatbelt? Who doesn't have their kids in a car seat, right? It became transformed. All right. The fee. Why? Why is Elohim associated with nature and Teva and Toiveya and all of the stuff that we talked about? The fee shemastir haor shalamayla, because it restrains, it holds back, it screens that infinite light. So this sounds mean. Why are you screening? Why aren't you giving me everything? Because again, if the teacher, or in this case Hashem, is concerned with the student, the beneficiary, he screens it according to his ability. Now we are flawed human beings, and we overscreen, and we baby our children, and we're terrified that don't do it, it's okay, I don't want you to get hurt, let me do it for you. Or we over-empower them. I don't want to tell my kids what to do, let them go out there, but they want some guidance. They're coming to you and ask for guidance, go figure it out yourself, just going to ask somebody else. So we're not so good at it. Or we try, we do our best, but Hashem is really good at it. So he does it just perfectly. And we want to peck away, and he allows us to, because sunken within that sea of nature is the infinity of Hashem. But we got to go looking for it. We got to go and find it. And again, you think about the cynicism of ourselves. Oh, nobody's a good person. Nobody is virtuous. Everybody's a criminal. And where do we look? We look to government. We look to the industries and so on. And then we get disappointed. All right. It is concealing what is really going on, that there's a life force that is giving continuous existence, like we talked about. Hashem didn't just create the world past tense 57, 82 years ago. Hashem is continuously creating the world. That's a little scary. It's overwhelming for us. We wouldn't know how to, quote, deal with that. So we look for an opportunity to see the infinity of Hashem. The nira ki'ilu ha'olam oimed u'misnahe b'derech hateva. So the world looks like it's functioning the way it functions. It looks like it's doing what it's doing. It looks like it's going through its repeated identity. That's what the world looks like. It's just doing what it does and doing what it does and doing what it does. That's what the world looks like, which is why, again, in secular society, we have to make up things to break the monotony. When a person has Kedusha, they know that even within the ordinary, there's not ordinary, because there's really the infinity and the opportunity. And then, even if it's hard for us to see it in our drudgery of routine, we get the gifts of Shabbos, we get the gifts of tzaddikim, we get these insights into truly infinite. If you don't have that, you got to make it up. So we make up things to break up the monotony of existence. Because think about the difference between a human being and an animal is exactly in things like Shabbos, Yom Tov, tzaddikim. The animal has no concept of any difference between today and tomorrow. They have the seasons, that's it. There is no sense that any day is going to have a difference to it. And that drudgery is the downside of the tzimtzum. So whereas Hashem is being mitzamtzem himself, so that he can attenuate his expression to us as an opportunity for us to take that lead and follow back towards the infinite. What can happen is we just stay in that routine and that drudgery. Like the pasuk that Shlomo HaMelech writes, the tzaddik falls 7 times and rises, the fool but once. Why does a fool only fall one time? Because he falls down. He says, forget it. Meaning, and again, maybe you've met people like this, and maybe all of us have a tendency towards it. I just want absolute stability. So nobody move, nobody say anything. No, I just want absolute assurance, because we're so afraid that there'll be a change. So again, we get, maybe we're all susceptible to it. Maybe we've encountered it. Oh, I hate my this. Well, why don't you change? Oh, change. How can you change? So, is there really a God? Come, let's learn about it. Well, I don't have time and I'm so busy. I thought this is a question that's always bothered me. Let's go look it up. Well, what do you mean look it up? Meaning a person hangs on to their issue, and now they have the perfect excuse to stay right where they are, because it's the opposite of seeing the infinity that is sunken within them. B'shem Elikim Zeh. Now this level of Elikim, who mugin v'nirtak l'shem havaya. Again, it's the screen. If Hashem were, he can do whatever he wants, but if Hashem creates the world with havaya, then we're awed. And Hashem is not looking for fans; he's looking for partners. And in order to be a partner, you have to speak the language of your partner. So if you come in and you want to impress everybody with how smart you are, like rabbis, and you use a lot of lingo and technical terminology, so everybody feels stupid, because I don't know what that means. So therefore, I just have to listen to you because you're the expert. This can come from your doctor, your lawyer, your plumber, your mechanic, whatever it is. It's a bullying tactic, and it keeps you quiet because you don't even know the lingo. And everybody, ever have people talking in a foreign language around you and they're all snickering? It's a form of bullying. They're keeping you out. So Hashem has the, whatever the word is, the gumption to be simplistic. Now, when you're simple, what could happen? You get abused. That's so obvious. Everyone knows that. I'm not impressed. Anyone can do that. But what is Hashem saying? Let me be simple. Let me be Elohim, so that you can then follow through and get the Havaya that's there. It's in there. It's sunken in there if you will look for it. Because that creative power that comes from Havaya, that gives creation something from no thing, should not be revealed to creations, because if it is, then we cease to be. And again, in walks the teacher, everybody's quiet. Just to share an anecdotal illustration of this that I was blessed to see, and you could see it on the videos. So you come to the Rebbe's Farbrengen. So everybody's milling around, everybody's talking, everybody's this and that, and so on. The Rebbe walks in, everybody, okay, you're the Rosh Yeshiva, you're some kid, you're some great chassid from 30 generations, he knows all of Chassidus, this guy doesn't know what page we're on, everybody, total bittul, instant bittelizer, not because the Rebbe demanded it. And then what does the Rebbe do? He speaks in Yiddish, the language of the people. And the Rebbe is talking about things that people can understand. Yeah, sometimes the concept, like everybody's looking at each other, well, I hope someone understands. I don't know what's going on here. I hope so. They tell the story that when the Rebbe, our Rebbe, was still first came to America, he had a Farbrengen. How many Chassidim were there? Few people. So Rabbi Posner's father, Zolgazunsain, was there. And he tells the story that Rabbi Shusterman, Olav Shalom, was there. And everybody was baffled. So they looked at Rabbi Shusterman. He was the guy who knew. So they said to him, do you understand what he's saying? He says, I don't, but there's genius there. I don't know what he doesn't know. He's the smartest guy. All right. So, think how rough it must have been for the Rebbe, Okay. I got some stupid people here. Let me try to say this real slowly, okay? So this is how it is. Okay. So you become total bittul b'mitzias. Bechinas gevura zoy v'tzimtzum hazeh, u'gam kein bechinas chesed. This Gevura we now understand is a chesed. So again, Gevura gets a bum rap. We think, oh, Gevura is like harsh, rigid, and unbending, and not helpful. And chesed is lollipops and sweet. This is the point the Alter Rebbe is making. It's not just that it's nice. It's all one and the same. There's not a Nasa lane and a Nishma lane. There's not a chesed lane and a Gevura lane. It's all the same. It's funneled through the stencil. The chesed, the Gevura is chesed. It's not just got a chesed motivation. It is chesed because it is thinking about the beneficiary. Because if I'm not thinking about the beneficiary, I talk what I want to talk, whether that guy understands what I'm talking about or not. And this is that quality. This is what it means that the Gevura is contained within the chesed. Because remember, a surefire sign of holiness is cooperation. A surefire sign of klipa is my way or the highway. Yaakov becomes Yisrael because he's willing to incorporate Asov within him. I mean, you might think, why would you ever want to dress up as Asov? Ew, icky poo. Because there's a quality of Asov that Yaakov needs to incorporate in order to become Yisrael. Why does Asov fail? Because he's not willing to incorporate his Yaakov. Why is the soil, quote, successful? Because it surrenders its nutrients to the vegetable, to the animal, to the person, to Hashem, to replenish the soil. In contrast to the desert, where the grains of sand remain independent. Why is salt associated with death? That Asaph asked about how does one tithe salt? Because salt is also about separation. It sucks out the water. It draws out anything that brings coalition. Water is life is Torah because it brings coalition amongst characteristics. It brings them together instead of separating them. That's the surefire sign of holiness. So it's not just that chesed is also nice. The chesed and the gevura are the same. If we pull back on the other side of the stencil, it's all chesed and gevura. It's all the same, like letters that allow us to create words, not 5 individual letters. They become one word. They forfeit their identity. Now, we as human beings, maybe it's more male than female, we're terrified of this. We're afraid if I'll forfeit my identity, I'll get crushed. But then there's the holy ways. One of the reasons why people join the military is because they forfeit their individuality into something greater. For men, the concept of minyan. What is minyan? That we don't care who you are, how smart you are, and whether you stand there and say amen, boom, we got 10. You forfeit your individuality to become subsumed in something greater. People are terrified of this. Again, maybe you've seen it, maybe you've been experiencing it yourself. People moving along in their Yiddishkeit, they get very scared that they've lost their identity. But I was always that person. They're terrified of losing that individuality. And here we're saying it's not a loss because the Gevura and the Chesed are all one if we are willing to rise above the Elohim side of it to the origin of it in the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei side of it. All right, we'll stop here and we'll continue, God willing, next Davach.